fact that you are doing good work, excellent work, is a display of God's nature and is glorifying to God. So just doing the work in and of itself is glorifying to God and partaking in what you were created to do.
You're listening to the Follower of One podcast. We want our faith to matter full time, whatever we're doing, but especially at work. Here's today's podcast. Hey, Follower of One, this is Mike Henry, and today on our interview we have a guest, Ryan Howard with Your Faith at Work. Ryan, welcome to the party.
Hey, it's great to be here. Looking forward to talking, Mike.
You and I met a few weeks back or a few months back because you were podcasting and I was looking for Faith at Work podcasts.
Yeah, it was kind of neat to get in touch with you. I think I had just started the podcast. I'd had the blog going for a little while and putting some articles out, and just recently started the podcast here. Well, back in July, I think. Mm-hmm. And then you had reached out, and yeah, it was great to connect. It's kind of neat to see all of the different ministries that are coming up here and kind of just getting to connect with different people on the same path here with Faith and Work.
And you were working on a dissertation. Now you have a PhD, so why don't you tell everybody a little bit about that and how you got into this?
Sure. So I just finished my PhD in biblical studies from Louisiana Baptist University. That was back in May. And I did my dissertation on faith. It was called Faith at Work, and it was exploration of the role of work in the life of the followers of Jesus Christ. And so how work has a significant role and a central role to the life of Christ followers. And so explored that, and kind of how I got into that was, that's the kind of the end of that story, but started a long time before that. But, I studied engineering and did my MBA and just been working, and then decided to pursue more research and writing, and then got into that, and several years later got down the path of, well, maybe there's faith and work here is something, and started researching it a little more. And I was hoping I'd have something to add to a blog or start a blog, or my wife and I were going to some things to try and publish your writing, and you had to pick a topic. And so I thought, well, faith, business, and what I was hoping I could kind of add on to my business and work ended up being pretty foundational, actually a central role, and actually the image of God and as a creator and worker, and displaying His glory through our work. And so found out it was a lot bigger deal than I thought, and so that explored into actually doing my dissertation on that. Wow.
And so your dissertation is on the subject of how God created work and how that works?
Yeah, it's an examination of the role of work in the life of Christ followers. And so It was looking at the role work plays, how God created work. Work was actually existed before the fall of man. So work is not a bad thing. Work is actually good. In the dissertation, I went through different literature and how people have viewed work in the past, and how the Bible actually, work is a theme all throughout the Bible, and how God uses the work of His people to accomplish His will, and how our work displays God's glory in and of itself. It's not just the results we get, but the good work that we're doing is a display of God's nature and participating in the creativity that He did Himself in creation and in us. And He's always working, as Jesus said, and we're His workmanship too. And so kind of just explored that. And then I tried to add that is, okay, we got our right thinking about biblical work, what biblical work is, or biblical perspective, but then now what? And I tried to explore a new approach to work. Okay, well, now that you know that, how do you go to work differently? What does that look like? And that's kind of the second half of the dissertation, toward the last third of the dissertation, what I explored there.
Very cool. Did you do a survey with this?
There was mostly secondary references that I used. So I didn't have to do any primary surveys. Those were already existed to what I needed. It already was there from a Barna group. They had just recently done a survey, actually last year, that I could use for some of that research. And there was some other more Gallup had workplace stuff that I could kind of pull in and draw ties in between everything. And so I was able to do most of that, and just other narrative things, I was talking with people. And, it's interesting though, but when a lot of people think of, okay, let's put faith and work together, the two things they kind of go to are ethics or morality, like being an ethical worker, and maybe being able to evangelize or share your faith. Those two things are very important, but most often it seems that people, including myself back then, that's what it was reduced to when you think of faith and work, is that's the two things that come up. And it's a lot more than that. It's actually displaying God's nature, and we're called to a lot more. There's different kinds of callings. It's not just pastors and evangelists and missionaries, that have a calling. There's, we see throughout the Bible lots of callings, like Joseph, and he wasn't leading a church or a synagogue or a temple worship or anything like that, and God used him big ways.
The first thing everybody always says to me when I say anything about faith and work is, "Oh, you can't do that," or I really don't feel comfortable talking about that. And I'm going, "Who said anything about talking?"
Whoa, that's a good point. Yeah. What's the saying? You preach the gospel every day, and if you get a chance, you talk about it. Something like that.
Yeah, it seems interesting.
That's another thing, actually, I think that I've kind of felt maybe there's a thread there to pull on, is to equip people to even, how do you walk that out in the workplace? I mean, if people are scared of, maybe they don't know what is acceptable in work and how to be their authentic self. And, there's a big push for that in the workplace now. And Christians should feel the same, to be able to be themselves and to, be equipped to know what's acceptable. And what I like to emphasize is the importance of partnering with God in our daily work. We're not just going out and doing, applying things we memorized. We actually have an interactive relationship with God where He's actually helping me in the daily things going on.
Yeah. I noticed that in your ebook too. You use that term, partnering with God, quite a bit. So tell us more about that.
Yeah, so if you look at like Joseph and Daniel in the Bible, they had problems in the world with what was going on, and they said, well, I can't solve this, but my God can. I'll talk with Him, and He'll give me the answer, or He'll give me the interpretation. And they would actually go and fast and pray and seek God for something, and God gave them answers to tough problems that no one else could solve. And so when we come together, the Bible also says that, we're God's workmanship. He prepared good works for us to walk in, do all things for the glory of God. We don't receive because we don't ask Him, or we ask with wrong motivations, and God uses everything for our good. These are things that are an interweaving of God and us in our daily lives, and that includes our work. And so that's where a lot of people just kind of leave their work, maybe faith, at the door, or maybe they don't even think about it. It's kind of an unconscious, it's not Sunday or it's not Bible study time, so they just don't go there. Well, the first thing is to shift our thinking, and then to actually go to God with the things going on in our work. Maybe we've got a difficult relationship or a difficult project or a deadline or something. And it's not that He's just some big cosmic problem solver, but He's certainly no less than that. And so He wants to be engaged with us, though. That's the exciting part, is that He knows what's coming. Nothing's going to surprise Him. He already promised to use everything for our good. That includes our work, and nothing's arbitrary. Think of that lens that we look through as Christ followers in our work, to know that God is using everything in our work to shape us, to shape people around us, to make us into who He wants us to be, discipling us, transforming us, and also affecting those around us, extending His kingdom, extending His influence. But, we need to have an intimate relationship with Him, a partnership, to be able to do that, to where He's giving us, you could say, directions or just interactions all day long, where, little nudges and little directions and what He wants us to do and things like that. So it's always this interaction back and forth.
One of the things that I say is God's already working in the lives of everyone there. He's already working in the relationships between everyone there. And, I got some of this from the old Experiencing God book by Henry Blackaby and Claude King, I think were the two authors. God's busy. My job is to figure out what He's doing and then join Him in it.
That's a great point. I really like the way you put that. There's already connections and things going on with everybody around you and all the projects around you, and God's engaged in that and aware of all of that, and you're being tossed in the middle of that to represent Him and to do what He has and wants for you to do, so that He can be glorified and His will and desires can be furthered in His kingdom.
Yeah. It's challenging to me to believe that He went to all the trouble to put me in this situation. Maybe even as I'm resisting it or complaining about it or whining about it. And He has some other purpose for me in that besides me just whining, "Oh, would you please get me out of here? I'm not enjoying this today."
Yeah, that's another thing that comes up. And like you mentioned, the ebook, that it's called 21 Days to a New Workplace You. And it's a jumpstart guide to faith at work. And it's kind of taking the everyday things that we should be doing as Christ followers and infusing those into our work. And one of them is that your work's not about you. and my work's not about me. It's about God and what he wants to do. And when we see it that way, it's a little easier to open our minds up a little bit to what he might want to do in a situation versus it's not just about me and my comfort and
Yeah.
furthering what I want. But when we're close with him, we want what he wants. And when we really trust him, that's what walking by faith is trust. Then we can partner together with him and enjoy it the way that he designed us to.
Yeah, no, I agree. Years ago, I heard Erwin McManus say, just fall madly in love with God and then do whatever you want.
That is, yeah, exactly. That's perfect. Yeah.
So what were the things that kind of clicked you around to where you said, I need to be more active in making my own difference in this space?
Well, I've always loved writing and research, and that's where I started doing the PhD. And halfway through that, I realized not everybody likes writing and research. And so I just felt this pull to do some sort of writing and some sort of publishing and some sort of speaking. And my wife was the same, and she's a musician, a Christian singer. And so we saw this class to how to publish your writing. And so we decided to go to that, and we made some connections there and ended up going to these Christian writing conference. And you had to pick a topic, like I mentioned, and I picked the faith and work. And then as I started to get into it, and it got a little bigger deal, and I thought maybe there was something there. And then I was looking online for some stuff about that to try and see is there going to be something here I can write about. And I had always felt like a pull to business, to work in that regard, and not like a seminary, And I remember when I first gave my life to Christ, I was back in college, and everybody's talking about, they're going to go be a pastor. And I kind of thought, well, is that what I have to do now? Or, okay, but I didn't really feel a pull for that. And, it was years later where I'm at the point now where I'm looking and saying, okay, what can I write about? Well, there was a book online just from reading like the back cover online, the free preview, and like the introduction. God just completely illuminated to me, you're anointed for this. There's actually anointing for different things other than, like I said, pastors and missionaries and church leadership and that sort of thing. Those are needed, but it's not the only thing you can do for the kingdom of God. And so that really lit in me like, wow, there's more here, where I feel like God just flipped the switch. And then as I started to pursue that more and starting to writing more, I felt more of a passion, like a burning passion coming out, to where it's like, I just got to say that I have to share this. I have to talk about it. And as I talked about it more, I saw that there's a desire for that. There's a need for that. And so that's where I just felt like a calling to get out there and to just start pushing it and helping people in this way, and to live out their faith in their work, and to see that God cares about that. So
do you remember the name of the book?
Yeah, it was Anointed for Business by Ed Silvoso. So great.
I'm familiar with it. It's a good book.
Yeah, definitely. I'll never forget, I just saw that title, Anointed for Business, and I thought, whoa, that's interesting. Yeah. And then that's when, like I said, just kind of blew the top off of what I was even thinking before. Like, it completely expanded. I kind of use the analogy of, you go to the ocean and the water's up to your knees, and you're like, this is neat. And you go out a little further and it's up to your waist. And as I look into this faith at work stuff a little more, and then it's up to your chest, and then all of a sudden there's a huge drop off, and it's like, wow, this is way bigger than I expected, And in fact, it's foundational. And then you find out, well, it's in God's character, in his nature. He's a worker. And it's like, whoa, this is way more important than I thought.
Yes. Oh, I think that's very interesting how the analogy that you draw is really cool, because it does keep going. I mean, I get amazed when I think about how great God must be, that he would mask himself to the degree that he's masked, just so that we wouldn't freak out.
Yeah, you really got to trust him with that too, where he's giving you enough to take a next step, and you got to just do that, and he'll give you more. And yeah, that's a good point.
So your normal day job now, you're still in engineering, correct?
Yeah, I'm in. So I've worked in a few different areas. So I've worked in like supplier development. So I help companies. Like that's what I'm doing now, is I evaluate their business to work together. I evaluate their operations, and then I do, if they get into trouble with some things, I come and help them resolve the problems, or I help them do improvements to their manufacturing operations or their business processes, that sort of thing. And so I've also worked in strategic sourcing, so
Hmm.
doing global contract negotiations with suppliers. And so I think God's taken me to over 100 different manufacturing facilities in 20 different countries, and just kind of, lots of neat ministry and neat people that I've met and been able to even pray with, and just experiences that he's given me with that. So, and then also kind of worked in operations as a supervisor, production supervisor, so got to feet on the ground there and see how things are working, and did a lot of other cost management stuff, so doing like market analysis for pricing changes and materials and different currencies and indexes and things like that. So, but yeah, now working in the manufacturing development and kind of supplier development
Very cool.
place now, so
So,
kind of engineering role. So yeah.
and you're with a large manufacturer, so that's kind of what makes that easy for you to change between all those different roles, correct?
Yeah, that's right, and that's all in the same location. So there's 5 different facilities here where I live, and yeah, it's all a global manufacturer, so a lot of different opportunities.
Very cool. So you became a Christian in college. Everybody else is talking about going to become a pastor. Aren't you kind of glad that we have more options than that?
Yeah, it is. In fact, there's a lot of people, I think, that maybe even went that route that weren't necessarily called to be a pastor, and maybe realize that a little later. But I think it's important that pastors know that. It's not just volunteering for churches, it's not just leading small groups or community groups, or help being part of a welcome team at church and things. Those are all needed and very important, but it's not the only way to play spiritually, so to speak. I mean, everybody has a role to play, and I think that's important for pastors, and even in the seminaries, to be teaching, to understand is that everybody is playing their part in expanding the kingdom of God. And someone might be called to be, in a firefighter, or could be called to be a policeman, or called to be, those service industries are more like a doctor or something, a nurse. It's easier to think, okay, this is helping people directly, so yeah, I could be called to that. But maybe an accountant, or like me, like an engineer or a manager, people don't always necessarily think they could be called to that, but they could be. I mean, Joseph was a manager. Joseph managed a household. There was advisors to kings in the Bible, and government advisors, and nowhere near a church, so those were definitely, they were doing God's work. And so, yeah, you're right, though. It is exciting to know that. Wish I'd have known it a lot sooner. I trust God's timing with that, but definitely trying to help people find that sooner than later.
Yeah, there are days when I learn new things and I'm going, oh, that makes perfect sense. I wonder why I didn't know that decades ago. And
right, and then you just trust God's sovereignty and giving you what you need.
I do. Sometimes I wonder if he's not going, yeah, Henry, I wonder why you didn't know that decades ago either.
I might have had that thought a time or two. Or I've actually told you this a few times before, so it's time you remember it.
Yeah, exactly. But also, the other thing that I think is important, I think sometimes we even forget. So your company manufactures goods. The people who work for a supplier of your company are doing God's work, because it produces something that your company buys so that they can ship it to their customers. The people
Absolutely.
who manufacture cardboard, or the people who make trash drums. I grew up in the trucking business, and I did a lot of sweeping. And the people who make brooms and the people who make trash drums make it so that I could sweep up the trash around there so that people didn't get injured when they were loading and unloading trucks. When I was a kid, I think it all matters.
It does, absolutely. And what I try and help people see is that it's really great when we can draw a direct connection to, like, the service of others, like the actual benefit physically for someone, or emotionally or intellectually. But it's also just the fact that you are doing good work, excellent work, is a display of God's glory, a display of God's nature, and is glorifying to God. So just the work that you're doing, a good job. I mean, obviously it needs to be honorable work that honors God, and it's righteous work, but just doing the work in and of itself is glorifying to God and partaking in what you were created to do. And it's not only because, well, it benefited someone else. That is important too, but it's also just doing the good work in and of itself, and you enjoying that relationship with God while you're doing that.
Yeah. And having the opportunity to interact with other people while you're doing that.
Yeah, exactly. I like what you said at the beginning. You're not necessarily always talking. I mean, God spoke through a donkey in the Bible, so you never know. It could
Hmm.
be the fact that you opened that door for someone, or the fact that you handled a project a certain way, or how you responded when a mistake was made, that God uses to illuminate and reveal Himself to someone through.
Yeah.
That where you're not even necessarily talking about Jesus. It's great when we get the chance to do that, but like you said, I mean, there's a lot more to living for Him than just talking about it.
Yeah, exactly. Now, you've been running Your Faith at Work for how long?
So I launched it in July of 2018. And so then I worked a year and a half, but I kind of took a little 8 month break there while I was finishing my dissertation at the end of last year. So then I kind of
Yeah.
relaunched it in July of this year. And so then that's a June, July timeframe this year. And then that's when I launched the podcast to go along with it.
What
Trying to
else are you planning to add?
So it's like we've got the ebook there. I've got another book that's going to be hopefully coming out early to mid next year, which will just be I'll take my dissertation and make that into more of a book that's more for a common audience rather than an academic. And then we've also got a boot camp that's going to be coming out. That's like a 5 day video series that will just be short videos, and people sign up through email and they get an email once a day for 5 days, and it'll go. It's kind of I call it a boot camp because it's like an intense. We're going to go through all these principles really quick just to
Hmm.
jumpstart your faith at work journey. That's another one. We've also got some webinars that are going to be coming out. So I'd like to have one that's going to talk about modern research, the Bible, and your work. These three things go together, and how it's just a whole picture of what God created and how God designed us to work that way. And we can just change how we think and then launch into what God wants us to do. So be doing that. And then got a kind of a Facebook group community starting where I think it's kind of similar to what you're doing with the community there, but it's more, well, that's kind of just getting started now, but just a community of people to come together, ask questions, that sort of thing. So, but really kind of the boot camp and webinars, and then doing some other speaking engagements and that sort of thing as well. So I think, yeah, and the final thing I think is just getting more resources online on yourfaithatwork.org so that people can dig deeper into some maybe theological topics that they want to know more about, or maybe apologetics, or how to witnessing in the workplace, or things that come up, and just working with excellence, maybe even how to interview, or how to network, or how to do different practical things like that.
Well, and I want to encourage you to add those in our resources directory as well. Because as you and I talked before, I don't care how people figure this out, and I don't care whose stuff they're looking at when they do it.
Yeah.
You can add resources in our resources directory. Anyone listening to this podcast, if you would like to add a resource to our resources directory, go to follower1.com/resources directory, and there's a button down at the bottom of that page that says submit a resource, and fill out the boxes, and we'll check it out and get back with you and let you know if we add it to the website or not, because we want people who are looking for this kind of stuff to be able to find it.
That's great. Yeah, I really like that, aggregating the different resources to bring people together and find what they need.
Anything that we're doing, I'm happy to try and do it with you. For example, if you want the people on your Facebook group to do a marketplace mission trip or something like that, be happy to do that as well. I don't want to hoard people's email addresses or any of those things. I just want to get us doing this. I think one of the things that we focus on, and I notice in your deal, you talk a lot about making notes. Your ebook is basically a journal operation where you document a lot of things that you're going through.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I've been trying to do is encourage people to get someone to do this with them, because I found that we do it better when we're doing it with someone else.
That's right. That's fantastic. And that's actually, in my dissertation, I gave some recommendations for like church leadership, recommendations for academics, and recommendations for individuals. And one of those is have like-minded people around you. And that's just for the Christian life in general. But I really like your idea of just was specifically related to the marketplace mission trip and the work, faith and work and integration, and being able to talk through things as well and keep on track and make sure you're continuing to progress there as well.
One of the things that I've been kind of bouncing up against lately, people have these entrenched habits in the way that they do their job, and those habits become a barrier for them inviting God into more of their day. Do you notice people pushing back and saying, well, I don't have time to do this, or I'm too busy, that kind of thing?
That's a good observation. I think self reflection, kind of being able to evaluate ourselves and look at ourselves is something that, just as a Christ follower, self examination, that he tells us to do that. And so, yeah, I think that is definitely something where we just kind of get used to a normal mode of operation. And, there's been jobs where I've worked in where it's really made me think. I mean, they're all challenging, but I mean, just am I really enjoying this work? A challenge in that regard, where a lot of maybe stressful situations and difficult relationships, and it makes me wonder, what do I really believe what I'm preaching and talking about? And it really made me dig deeper, where I had to actually sit and think and reflect and create these new habits of doing that anyway. But I think that can get in the way, and that's where, like you mentioned in the ebook, that it's a free download, and that's where the first part is just making room for God to speak. So kind of tuning in to the right radio station so you can actually hear what he's already saying. It's coming over speakers, but we need to have the radio on. And then developing different disciplines is the second part, like key spiritual disciplines. And then there's 4 parts, and the third part really starts to tie in the workplace kind of virtues that we should be looking at, and how that reflecting on our work. And then the part 4 is walking by faith or working by faith, where it's actually bringing it all together and saying, okay, well, in your work, this is what's going on, and what about this kind of situation? And it looks for specific things that are going on that people, their eyes can be illuminated to what God's already doing around them. Like, like you said, he's already got connections going on with other people and with situations around you. And once we get tuned into that, it's game on. God's ready to work, and we hit the ground running. And so, but it's almost like a light switch. It's like, well, now I see everything, but how could I miss this? God's hand is everywhere.
Well, the way you explain that makes a lot of sense relative to some of the experience that we're having with the Marketplace Mission Trip, because on the way the Marketplace Mission Trip works right now, it's 2 weeks of daily email. And I haven't really done a lot of preparation work with warning people about the distractions and clearing your head. Your first day is day 1 is clearing your head. Remember, you're not guilty. Yeah. Just relax and, tune out your cell phone. And maybe I should do a little more in the preparation or the lead up once you sign up for this thing, and say, hey, I plan to make some time, because it just kind of blew me away that people would have a challenge reading an email every day for 2 weeks.
Yes, absolutely. And, as I've tried and write and create content and record and do all this stuff, it's like, I think I got all this time, and then it's like, well, where does the time go? And it made me step back and think, well, am I really that busy, or am I just letting the time get filled with stuff? Is it filled with what it needs to be filled with? So I think that's a great point. And it's just it really doesn't take that much time to have and that shouldn't be what it's about anyway, is, do I have time or not? Because the priority is our relationship with Christ and doing what he has for us. But for us to have a thriving relationship, carving out that time, if we do it consistently, and like you said, just start, even if it's just starting with reading an email and doing the little steps in that mission trip, it can completely revitalize everything. Something I heard once that I really liked is, in the natural world, we get hungry by not eating. And in the spiritual world, the more we eat, the more hungry we get. And the more God we have in our life, the more we pursue him, the more we want, because we start to see those connections. He starts to speak to us. He starts to give us insights into what's going on specifically, and you really start to see that partnership. But if we're not creating that time and we're not giving him a chance to speak to us, then we shouldn't be wondering why we're not hearing him speak, if our Bible's collecting dust on the shelf.
No, that's actually a great observation. The more of God we have, the more we want. One of the things I've been saying all along is we all have all of Jesus that we want, right? Almost everybody, we have this certain amount of things that we do to bring Jesus into our life. And going beyond that, sometimes for a lot of people, it seems daunting to them. And I'm going, no, I'm looking for ways to do that.
Yeah, and actually Moses and the Israelites we're all as close to God as we want to be. Moses knew God face to face, and the Israelites said, no, you go see God and come tell us what he said. And they got what they wanted. Right?
Yeah, and that's a great point.
And it's the same today. How close do you want to be? And that's like in a lot of my podcasts and a lot of my writing, I try and really hit on your relationship with Christ. It's the Holy Spirit that's guiding you. That is number one. It's all through Jesus. It's none of this other fluffy stuff. It's faith in Jesus Christ. That is the door you walk through before any of this stuff matters. And that's the foundation for all of this, because that's all what it's for. It's to pursue that relationship for what we were created for, and it's an extension of that.
Very cool. And so with that, I would ask for one tip, one pointer. What's one thing that someone listening to this podcast can do tomorrow to grow their faith in Christ?
My one tip would be make a tiny commitment that you can keep to where there's no mental resistance to. So if it's I'm going to spend 1 minute praying, or I'm going to read one page of my Bible, whatever it is that you can do consistently for the next how many days, just pick that and stick with it. And I'd say carve out the time. So whatever you have to do, whatever little tiny thing you have to do to commit to carving out the time, whether you're journaling or writing or reading or worshiping or whatever other different disciplines that you have, carve out the time, or prayer, whatever it is, carve out the time. And I'd say make a little tiny commitment that will just kickstart that to get the ball rolling on that time that you're going to carve out, and build that little habit, and then it'll grow from there.
Yeah, that's a great reminder. I always pray. I try to remember to pray, Lord, please redeem this time or multiply it back to me. If something takes longer than I thought, and it's in His control, then I'm saying, okay, God, let me give this voluntarily, and you make with it what you want.
Yeah, just relax, focus on the relationship with Him, and stay close with Him, and He'll do what He wants to do, and we'll be a part of that.
Very cool. So Ryan Howard, Dr. Ryan Howard, we will have all his links to every place of his in our show notes too, but his website is yourfaithatwork.org, right?
Yep.
And anything else you want to tell people about how to connect with you? Like I said, we'll put that stuff you sent me in the email. We'll put that in the show notes as well.
Sure, yeah. So I'm more active on LinkedIn. So if you just look up Ryan S. Howard, pretty much the Facebook and LinkedIn as well, where I'm getting more active on there. But really the website, connecting and getting signed up through the email, they can stay in touch with everything that is going on with the new webinars and boot camp and new products and articles and things coming out, as well as we posted some of that stuff in the community, that Follower of One community. So yeah, excited to be on with you, and it's a great conversation.
Yeah, well, and thank you for what you're doing, and thanks for everything that's going on. This is Mike Henry with Follower of One. Check out what Ryan's talking about is community.followerofone.org. That's a private community where we're going to try and help one another continue growing in our faith using our time at work as a missionary in our workplaces. Ryan, thanks for being on the show, and I look forward to talking to you again. We may do some of these topical ones in the future that I was telling you about earlier.
That sounds great. Well, thanks for having me. It was a real pleasure to talk to you, and I look forward to continuing to partner together here.
All right. Thanks a lot. You've been listening to the Follower of One podcast. Follower of One is an online community for those who want to intentionally follow Jesus every day at work or wherever we go. Join us and learn more at community.followerofone.org. And don't forget to subscribe to this podcast and share it in your various social media platforms. Thanks for listening.